Hi, class. It's Dr. St. Clair. This week we're going to cover, I think, really important subject. I mean, every week we've really hit upon and focused on some real important principles and subject matter. This week, again, it's no different. We're going to talk about pricing. And so we'll move right into it. But one thing I want to emphasize, I use these things probably almost every day at work. Um, how do I position our product and making sure that I'm not only capturing but giving um, the most value, but also capturing the value we're creating and making sure we're maximizing that value. And also, as I mentioned, capturing said value. Learning objectives. It's always good to understand what are we going to learn this week, especially if we're engaged in doing the reading and actively participating on the discussion boards, which it seems to be almost everyone is. So, objective one, we're going to talk about what is price. And really, when we think about pricing, it's really changed, um, especially thinking about different contexts. When we're talking about C to C, it's a much different look. Uh, B to B, B to C, those channels make things look a little different in terms of how we price, but also the product mix, and we'll talk about that as well. So those all have a lot of bearing, and obviously the channels are the verticals you're in, and the channels within those verticals. And again, product mix. So there's a bunch of variables that you're going to put in that equation to understand where you should be price wise, and we'll cover that. We'll define price and really focus our energies on major pricing strategies. And we'll identify and discuss the other important, external, internal factors that really impact the firm's pricing decision. What really impacts how we price things? The closest example I have, the past 2 years, up until about a year ago or so, we had supply side challenges like nobody's seen, right? At least for the last 100 years with COVID. And so things were changing at a drastic rate. The tumultuous supply side really impacted how we price things, not only the duration, but um, the amount of price increases and the frequency. So it was a really tough environment to not only practice in, but to price in. So really had to sharpen our pencils, had to get bold and courageous with pricing. And so there were a lot of things like inflationary headwinds made a significant impact on how we price things. And tight labor market. Though about 15% of our product is labor, uh, the rest is other inputs. Still has a huge bearing in that cost. So let's talk about Peloton real quickly. They do a great job of getting a premium price, but not by not focusing on the price. It's all about um, what they're selling, right? Focusing on really the experience that they're creating. And so Peloton obviously did very well during COVID, but it was doing well before, and it's doing pretty well after. They've had competitors enter the marketplace. But the point here is about Peloton was, in addition, how they created a subscription based model, right? It's got a $39, maybe a little bit higher now, membership fee to access that brand's digital network and that their most, I guess they call them appealing features. But even at these high prices, I think the Peloton itself is thousands of dollars. It has a loyal fan base, really has revolutionized the industry. I think they have over 6.5 or 7 million strong, that membership base. It was much higher during COVID, I think. It's come down a bit, but again, very strong because of how they position themselves. So when you think about the bike itself, I think it's around, here it says 1745. I think it's a little bit higher today, but close to that price point. So they're getting much higher prices, and it's about being part of this community. They don't sell on price, obviously. If they were, they wouldn't be able to sell their product. And we'll talk more about that positioning. So again, selling a sense of community rather than a price point. So let's go ahead and learn or speak to learning objective 1. What is price? Especially when we talk about, or within the context of today's fast changing environment. So let's think about, everyone knows Starbucks. How do they price their product? Think about so I don't want you to, or lead you to believe that price is not important, but there are many factors, non-price factors, that have gained significant importance. Price is very important, but there are other elements that determine a firm's market share and profitability. So when we think about price, is the amount of money charged for a product or service, or the sum of all the value that a customers exchange for the benefits of having or using the product or service. So when we think about the marketing mix, right? The 4 P's, price is the only element in that marketing mix that produces revenue. So it's so critical to understand how to price things, but often, maybe, I hate to say it, but it's probably one of the weakest areas in organizations. Because they either do, well, my cost is this and the competition's here, and this is where we're going to position ourselves. That's often done. So it's either a cost plus, which we'll talk about, or some variation of that. When price is also one of the most flexible marketing mix elements, so we think about price could be this very strategic tool, and it should be used as one. It can create customer value, build relationships, and obviously have a huge direct impact on bottom line. So no matter what the state of the economy is, so what I often see is companies want to reduce their price when things start to soften, when they see sales start to slow, the economy starts to soften a bit. But they need to focus on value. And I know it's easier said than done, but they really do. Otherwise, it just becomes a bake-off, and it's hard to outpace your competitors. And then it's really hard to get back to where you need to be, because your customer always remembers, well, you used to sell it to me down here, and why do you need to be back up here? And so it's really difficult to start playing that race to the bottom game. And you should never engage in it. If that's where you need to be and you can't get a good profit for your product, then maybe you don't have a good differentiation or value proposition. So learning objective 2. we're going to define price and then identify, as we talked about before, the major pricing strategies. So let's look at figure 10.1, and of course this is in your book. So this posits there's three major pricing strategies: customer, value-based strategy, cost-based strategy, and competition-based. So the price that, say, we charge or a company charges will fall somewhere between one that is too low to produce a profit and one that is too high to produce any demand. So you've really got to figure this out. So you've got to take into these major considerations: customers' perceptions of the product, value, pricing ceilings, and those types of things, the floor, etc. We'll talk more about that. So let's jump into customer value based selling. So what is customer value based pricing? Uses the buyer's perception of value rather than the seller's cost. I like value based pricing because, again, you really capture typically much higher pricing because you're offering significant value, like a Peloton. You base it off the value you're creating, not the cost plus pricing, right? And so don't confuse this with low price. Typically, this is higher price. You have to let customers decide, though, whether a product is priced right, and they'll let you know by either voicing it, right? There's always three options: exit, voice, and loyalty, right? So they can exit, not buy anything. They can voice that it's too expensive, or they will continue to buy. So effective customer-oriented product involves understanding how much value, and it might be different for some than all consumers, right? Some I see, and we typically try to be very, consistent across the board. But when you're dealing with OEMs and the like, you might have a product mix that's very similar, but you're getting more pricing based off of the quantity, based off of how you're packaging it, based off of other factors. When it's very similar, right, you're supposed to always charge people the same. However, depending on what you're doing, the value you're creating, you can charge different prices. So when you think about that, costs are always extremely important, and you have to have this target profit. Value-based pricing is based off of what the consumers are willing to really, their perception of that value, right? So it's customer driven. When we talk about cost-based pricing, it's product driven. And price is set to match perceived value. So let's look at 10.2. There's a lot to take in here, but basically this flow chart is illustrating cost-based pricing. Shows basically you design a good product, you determine product costs, and you set sort of this base cost, and you convince buyers of the product's value. Value-based pricing, so this hopefully clarifies anyone that's a little bit lost, and it can get tricky. You assess customers' needs and value perceptions. Then you set target price to match customer perceived, right? How they see the value What does that value equation look like? And then you determine costs that can be incurred. And then you design product to deliver desired value at that target price. Costs play an important role in setting price, but like everything else in marketing, good pricing starts with the customer and really understanding the customer. So let's talk customer value-based pricing. Good value pricing is offering just the right combination, right? Quality, good service, fair price. So think about context. The Great Recession, 2008, some of you are probably really young then, 2009, there was this fundamental shift and a lasting shift in consumer attitudes towards price and quality. So in response, many companies changed their pricing approaches to bring them in line with the changing economic conditions and consumer price perceptions. So more and more marketers adopted the strategy of good value pricing. Basically, they wanted to offer the right combination of quality good service at a fair price. So in many cases, this had involved introducing less expensive versions of established brand name products at new lower pricing lines. And then in other cases, good value pricing had involved redesigning existing brands to offer more quality for a given price of the same quality for less. So think about Aldi. That's a great example. That supermarket chain has established an impressive good value pricing position, right? So that's really a fantastic example. So they do what's called the everyday low pricing practices, which is really about, I think the king of LDP is Walmart, right? No really temporary price cuts, just everyday low price practices, as opposed to the value, the example they give over here is Steinway. Steinway piano is very expensive, but to a Steinway customer, it's a small price to pay for owning a Steinway piano, right? So it's again thinking about Steinway and value that they bring to a Steinway customer, like a Peloton. So everyday low pricing involves charging a constant everyday low price with few or no temporary price cuts. I don't know if you're old enough, but there used to be this blue light espresso they would do at Kmart. So they were pretty typically a low cost. I don't know if you remember Kmart, but they were sort of Walmart before Walmart existed, and then Walmart came in and sort of took over their market share, and they finally went out of business. I don't think there are any Kmarts left. They were based in Troy, but they had a national footprint. And they used to have this blue light special where they would charge lower prices at certain times. So it was really interesting when I saw this. It just made me think of that. Nevertheless, I think Aldi, though it has this low cost, it does have impressively high quality at low prices. So I think whereas you see some places like Walmart, I don't want to say they have low quality, but they have maybe lower quality on some things than others. But they do have lower prices. High-low pricing involves charging higher prices on an everyday basis, but running frequent promotions to lower prices temporarily. customer value based pricing. So if we think about Porsche, let me back up a bit. Let's define value-added pricing. So when we think about value-added manufacturers, typically we think about luxurious items. Um, so they attach value-added features and services to differentiate themselves. Uh, Lincoln's tried this or does this. Other high-end companies like Porsche and um, Jaguar and some of the others, De Beers Diamonds. So luxury specifically, there's a Porsche Drive subscription. So it promises these dreams on demand. So this select group of buyers, this value price bundle, goes beyond the basic product. People who drive Porsche love driving them. And they get to a fleet of Porsches at their fingertips, which is kind of cool. Now, it's probably expensive, but again, through their eyes, there's a lot of value added here. So cost-based pricing. So customer values, their perceptions set the price ceiling. Costs set the floor for the price that the company can charge. So we think about some examples would be Walmart, Southwest Airlines. So they become the low-cost producer in their industries. Companies with lower costs can set lower prices that result in smaller margins. But larger scale, right? Greater sales, greater profits, typically because of that scale. But if we look at other companies such as Apple, BMW, Steinway, and the like, people typically pay higher costs so they can add value and claim higher prices. So that's what Apple's doing. That's what BMW is doing. So let's take a look at cost-based pricing. What goes into it? Fixed costs. You probably all know what this is. I deal with it every day with P&L. Right? So these costs don't vary with production or any sales level, right? So there are things like rent, heat, your utilities, right? Interest, executive salaries. I mean, they're in our G&A, but they're all part of your fixed costs. And then we'll look at variable costs. Now, these vary, hence variable costs, with the level of production. So since they vary directly, right, they link directly with the level of production. So think about raw materials. If I make more, I'm going to have to buy more input, more raw material, more packaging. So those are going to change. So when we think of total costs, those are fixed and variable costs. Now, I'm sure most of you know that, but it's something to be mindful of when you're doing pricing. So if you think about marketing managers want to charge a price that will at least cover the total production cost, right? So I need to make sure that at least I start with, okay, I'm going to cover my costs. There are times when that doesn't happen, but that's pretty rare, and there's many reasons why you don't want to do that. But there are times when you will do that. But again, I don't want to get in the weeds here. So a company is going to watch these costs carefully. And if it costs the company more than its competitors to produce and sell a similar product, if it costs me more or my company more than it does my competitor, it's going to put me in a disadvantage, especially if I don't have a significant or compelling differentiation. And it has to be significant, right? It has to create that value proposition that they're willing to buy. But if it's very similar, then it really puts me at a competitive disadvantage. So let's talk about that. So take a look at these costs per unit at different levels of production. I'm sure you engineers will like these slides. So think about Lenovo or some notebook manufacturer. They build a plant to make 1,000 tablets. So we're looking over here. We'll make 1,000 tablet computers per day. Figure 10.3 here. Okay. So the short run average curve, it shows that a cost per tablet is high if Lenovo's factory produces only a few per day. But as production moves up to 1,000 tablets, average cost falls. So you can start seeing it fall. You can start to see it rise again. So you can start to see average cost fall. This is because fixed costs are spread out, right, over more units, with each one bearing a smaller share of the fixed costs. So when we think about this, we want to have an idea of where do we start to see scale? Where do we start to see the most efficient point to produce? Like, what is that per unit? So, but we can also see, the average cost will increase when the plant becomes inefficient, right? So that's the challenge I'm having today, to be quite honest, is we get a sweet spot, and once we get more units, it costs us more money to make, let's say I can make 100 units. It's more like a 5,000 for us. But once I get to 5,001, it costs me significantly more for each input. Because now I'm waiting for more machines, and it costs me more money from a labor perspective. And that's what we're saying here. So it's super important to understand what your curve looks like, your production level. So if Lenovo believed it could sell 2,000 computers a day, it should probably consider building a larger plant. So the plant would use more efficient machining work arrangements. So what if it was building 4,000? See how it starts to become less inefficient? So I just want you guys to be mindful of that. And we could start arguing back and forth. But that's not the point of the slide. The slide is just to start. Each facility has sort of what I call a sweet spot uh, based off of its current capacity. Now, you can change some things, but when you price, you need to understand fixed costs and obviously variable costs. But there's some other things to look at, like really what is our capacity? What's our throughput levels? When do we start to recognize some real challenges and create some constraints that weren't there before? What impact does this have on the overall? If I sell a $2 million customer, how does it impact the rest of our business? It's great growing the business, but now I've created problems for everything I now do in terms of producing product. So it's some things to think about. So you can see our cost per unit. So again, let's continue with this Lenovo example. This is a cost per unit as a function of accumulated production, right? So the experience curve, if we think about the Lenovo example continues as we follow this like 10.4 curve here. So if we produce basically what this curve is saying is, hey, I start to learn how to do things better and better and better. And my unit cost per unit comes down quite a bit. So maybe they start getting an early market share early in, the product's life cycle. So it needs to think about how does it price itself based off that. Maybe it needs to price itself here out of the gate. So it's maybe making no money, knowing it's going to end up here at $5 cost per unit rather quickly. And sometimes we do that as well, knowing that, hey, our initial costs are $10. But we know if we get to the 10,000 or the 80,000 or whatever that number is, we'll be at $5. So we'll price ourselves there, knowing that's where the market is. Things to think about. Again, that's a successful strategy. So cost-based pricing, I use this all the time. It's not my preferred choice, but there are a lot of markets. I shouldn't say that there. So our catalog business, for example, if it's what I mean by catalog is it's a standard product, but I don't always know where it ends up. Goes through distribution. I'll often just do cost plus. When I have a lot of information, I know the customer. I try to do value-based pricing because I understand them much better. I'm closer to them and I have the relationship. So I have a mix of pricing strategies, and I'm typically with the OEMs. I understand them, so I can again where there's much more differentiation, and I can leverage that to get a higher value because I know there's a higher perceived value in the product or product mix. But this cost base is straightforward. It's basically your cost plus whatever desired return on sales you want. And that's all you do is mark it up. And it's probably the most used because people understand it's very simple. I need 40% margins. I need 50% margins. I need 60% margins or 25% margins, whatever it might be. And it makes sense to everybody. And it's very simple to sort of quantify and understand and get your arms around. So the benefits, right? Sellers are certain about costs. price competition is minimized. Buyers feel it as fair. Well, I don't know about that because they don't always know what's fair. Disadvantages. It really does ignore certain things because it's kind of like, hey, this is my cost, this is my margin, here we go. So let's look at this. Cost-based pricing. So if we think about another cost-oriented pricing approach is break-even pricing, or variation called target return pricing. So we see target return pricing. The firm tries to basically to determine the price at which it will break even or make the target return it is seeking. So when we think about target return pricing, use the concept of a break-even chart, which shows that the total cost and total revenue expected at different sales volume levels. And that's kind of what I was talking about on the Lenovo thing. You may often say, well, our break even is when we get to 1,000 units at this pricing point. That's really all it is. I've got my fixed costs, total revenue, sales volume, right? And so I just kind of work through that and understand. I think it's kind of cool to see. Sometimes it's nice to put these together as well to say, okay, this is one way to look at it. Here are my fixed costs. When I get to here are my total costs. I know once I get above this line, I start to feel better about things, obviously. But here's where I'm trying to get to. So when we looked at the last two slides, the manufacturers consider different prices and estimating break-even volumes, probable demand, and profits for each. So this is basically a break-even volume table. That's all this is. So if the price is 14, I need 75,000. We do this all the time as well because I get so many customers that say, we're going to buy X from you. I typically say, I look at it and say, well, I'm going to at least break even right out of the gate, but I may not make the same margins I want to make unless they get to a certain point. So it may not necessarily be a break even, but it'll be more like a maximizing volume and profits chart. That's the kind of way I look at it. I try to always cover my costs because I think if I don't do that almost right away, it's hard because you get so many folks that so many moving pieces, especially with OEMs. The sales cycles are so long and things change that at least I can get my costs covered. So, but it's hard in some businesses because of the way you sell and just the margins and the break-evens and just the business mix is different. So competition-based pricing. So this is based on setting your prices from your competitor, their costs, their prices, and marketing offering. If we look at a cat, for example, they just dominate the heavy equipment industry. Some other industries, but really the heavy equipment industry. But they charge a premium because customers believe they offer and give more value for the price over the lifetime. So when we think about cost of ownership of a cat is much more attractive than other uh, heavy equipment manufacturers. So they charge premium pricing. But competition pricing involves really setting the pricing uh, based off of your competitors. Consumers will base their judgment of products value on the prices that competitors charge for similar products. So, in assessing competitors' pricing strategies, a company should ask really two questions. How does the company's marketing offering compare with competitors' offering in terms of customer value? I ask this all the time because there's certain things where we have very similar products, but overall, we think we've got a pretty good differentiation, so we ask a premium for many of our products. How strong are current competitors and what are their current pricing strategies? So ask those two questions. Think about overall marketing mix objectives um, in the mix. Companies often position their products on price, then tailor other marketing mix decisions to the prices they want to charge. This is you know, crucial product positioning factors that determine the product's market competition design. So many firms support such price positioning strategies with a technique called target costing. So let's look at what is target costing. Target costing starts with the ideal selling price based on customer value consideration, then target costs that will ensure that the price is met. So again, it's sort of understanding what the pay, what the value is, and then get the product where we need it to be price wise. Can we sell it for that? That's what you need. Once you get the product where it needs to be in terms of the value proposition, then you need to determine if its cost, then ask, can we sell it for that? So brand strategy might be built around premium pricing or affordable pricing. So let's think about an example where consumer electronic like Samsung or Sony offer ultra high technology at premium prices. Brands such as TLC, Hisense, and Vizio are positioned on good but not ultra high technology at lower prices. So think about, do you understand what they're doing, right? They're positioning themselves, still giving good quality, but they don't want to compete against Samsung or Sony. Like Vizio's aim is to make high quality technology and content affordable to everyone. That's not what Sony's trying to do, right? Sony wants to be a little bit higher. They're not high end, but they're higher end. So their marketing decision is much different. Their development distribution's different, their promotion's different, etc. But it has to play in concert with their overall decision, pricing decision, and obviously at a broader scale, their marketing strategy decisions. So let's look at other internal and external considerations that affect pricing. So when we think about top management sets the pricing objectives and policy, it often approves the pricing proposed by lower level management or salespeople, right? So when we think about in industries in which pricing is a key factor, think about airlines, aerospace, steel, railroads, or oil companies. Companies often have pricing departments to set best pricing or help others set them. So these departments typically report to marketing departments. In my world, sales, I'm sales manager. I'm also pretty much run the business, but uh, there's production managers and finance managers and everyone, accountants, they all have sort of a say in pricing. So, an organizational, who should set pricing, right? Who can influence pricing? So, think about those things. So, let's look at the market and demand. So, before setting prices, marketers must understand the relationship between price and demand for its products. So let's take a deeper dive at the price demand relationship. How does it vary for different types of markets? And then we'll discuss the methods for analyzing the price demand relationship. So we think about bows, for example. Pricing under a monopolistic competition. Bose sets its premium auto products apart not by price, but by the power of its brand, right? We're innovative, we're passionate, we're high quality listening experience. So one goal unites us all. Think about Bose and all of that differentiation that takes place. Very cool. Better sound through research, right? We also can think about how the internet has changed pricing. So the market and demand. Let's look at pricing in different types of market. Pure competition. So when we think about under pure competition, the market consists of many buyers and sellers trading in uniform commodities such as wheat, copper, financial securities. So no single buyer or seller has much effect on the going market price. Thus, sellers in these markets do not spend much time on marketing strategy. Monopolistic. So under this, the market consists of many buyers and sellers who trade over a range of prices because sellers can differentiate their offers to buyers, right? Oligopolistic. This consists of few large sellers. So we think about Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile. They consist of 90% of that cellular market. So each seller is alert and responsive to competitors' pricing strategies and market moves. Pure monopoly. So this market is dominated by one seller. So we think about the U.S. Postal Service is a perfect example. A private regulated monopoly, a power company, or a private unregulated monopoly. De Beers Diamonds. So pricing is handled differently in each case, but that's a good example of different types of markets. Higher price equals lower demand. The market demand. Analyzing the price demand relationship. So the demand curve shows the number of units the market will buy in a given period at different prices. Demand and price are inversely related. So let's look at that curve, right? So think higher price equals lower demand. So if we look at this demand curve 10.6, each price the company might charge will lead to a different level of demand. So I'm often worried about this too because I've changed prices. For example, my company, I've changed prices 26% since I've come on board. That's in 2.5 years. Now, a lot of it had to do with COVID, right? And that was significant. It was a really crazy time, right? It's probably the best way to put it. Very tumultuous, as I mentioned before, very challenging, inflationary. Challenges at supply side were drastic and unprecedented. So had a lot to do with, and I felt like we weren't really undervaluing our product. So each price level will lead to a different level of demand. So the relationship between the price charged and the resultant demand level is shown in this curve. So think about Q1 and Q2, quantity demanded, and P1, P2 are price points. So in the normal case, demand and price are inversely related. That is, the higher the price, the lower demand. Thus, the company would sell less if raised its price from P1 to P2. So these are always good to do if you understand your markets. Sometimes you can figure out if I went to a certain price point, even though I'd sell slightly less, I would make significantly more. Sometimes you'll find out you could sell significantly more by lowering your price slightly less. So these demand curves sometimes work really well to do. But that's all they're showing you with these curves. Other thing I think about is price, elasticity of demand, and inelasticity, which we'll talk about here. So elasticity is a measure of sensitivity of demand to changes in price. So when we think about price elasticity of demand, it's percent change in quantity demand, percent change in price. If demand is elastic rather than inelastic, sellers will consider lowering their prices. So I had to understand how inelastic our pricing was. I felt like we still have some inelasticity, so I could raise pricing. If I felt my price was elastic, I need to lower my price. Does that make sense? A lower price will produce more total revenue. So inelastic is when demand hardly changes with a small change in price. So sometimes, as I mentioned in the last slide, if you change, if you can change price slightly and significantly increase demand for it, you have price elasticity. If you can change price, maybe raise price, and it hardly changes with that price change, which I've done. No, again, you have to define what small is. Then you have inelastic. An elastic demand is when demand changes greatly with a small change in price, which we just talked about. So you need to figure out what your pricing demand looks like. So I want you to really understand what is price elasticity of demand. How responsive demand will be to change in price. If demand hardly changes with a small change in price, we say demand is inelastic. If demand changes greatly, we say the demand is elastic. If demand is elastic rather than inelastic, sellers will consider lowering their price. Under elastic demand, a lower price will trigger sharply increased demand and lead to higher revenue and profits. This practice, if we think about it, makes sense as long as the extra cost of producing and selling more does not exceed the extra revenue. So we're almost done here. We have to think about the economy as a whole. Economic conditions. They can have a strong impact on a firm's pricing strategies. If we start to next year, for example, slow down, we're not going to give a huge price increase. We'll probably look at maybe covering cost of living, right? What does those inflationary costs look like? And try to cover those. What are interest rates? Uh, those affect decisions for many. So there's different things that you need to look at when costing and what those price increases look like based off of economic conditions. Do consumers have to tighten their belts? You know, if the job market isn't as strong as it is today and people are out of work, they're not spending money. So you have to look at, okay, who am I selling to? What do I need to do? Do I have to sharpen my pencil to move product? Do I have to cut prices or offer discounts? How do I need to market it? What are my strategies in order to get to the consumer? What is the reseller's response to pricing? What's the government doing? And how does that impact? It's an external influence on pricing decisions. Social concerns. Right? Based off of societal considerations, there might be a lot of concerns with that. So, to meet the needs of cost conscious customers, think about Target introduced lower price store brands such as Up and Up. Beautiful things don't have to be spendy. And they really focused on going after those tighter budgets or those cost conscious consumers.